About 2 weeks ago, I learned from my father's relatives that his health was deteriorating, so I decided to stay with him for a while. My parents had divorced, and I lived with my mom, visiting dad on weekends and holidays. We shared a deep bond, and I felt his absence more after the separation. When I heard about his illness, it seemed like a chance to support him as he had always supported me. Unfortunately, my time with him was cut short. About a week after I arrived, he passed away from a heart attack. As his only child, I handled the funeral arrangements. I called my mom to inform her of his passing, expecting some compassion, but her response was cold and indifferent. I was shocked and hurt but had to focus on the funeral and notifying relatives. Amid these arrangements, I received startling news from home. A neighbor, whose daughter was a childhood friend, called, surprised about my supposed plans to move out. Confused, I explained that I had no such plans and intended to return soon. She then revealed that my mom had been misleading everyone, saying I was moving permanently. Under this guise, she had been clearing out my room, selling or discarding my belongings, including items from my childhood. The betrayal stung deeply, especially during such a painful time. Adding to the complexity, I discovered that my dad had left me his house in his will. Now, my mom, who had remarried and was prioritizing her new stepchildren, going as far as clearing space for them by disposing of my things, would have to make a decision: pay rent to stay in the house or move out. The situation was a harsh reminder of the strained relationship between my mom and me, contrasting sharply with the connection I had with my dad. Despite the heartache and upheaval, I was determined to honor my father's legacy and manage the new responsibilities he had entrusted to me. Growing up, I cherished a few personal items: my guitar, my extensive book collection, and the vintage record player my dad gifted me on my 15th birthday. Recently, an unexpected call from a neighbor revealed that these items were being sold off in what seemed like an urgent clearance. The motive? Making room for the children of my stepdad, David. My possessions were being discarded to free up space for them. This revelation struck a nerve. Furious and heartbroken, I immediately called my mom. Before she could even greet me, I confronted her, demanding to know why she would sell the very items that held memories of my dad. My mom was taken aback, scrambling for words while I pressed for an explanation. Eventually, she admitted that David and his children needed more space to feel at home. Although I had no issues with my step-siblings, I actually got along well with William and Sophia. The way my belongings were removed felt like a betrayal, especially while I was still mourning my father's passing. It felt like a deliberate erasure of my presence from her life, using my dad's death as a pretext. I couldn't hide my disappointment and told her directly that her actions were unforgivable. When I demanded at least the financial equivalent of what was sold, her reply devastated me further. She had already spent that money on gifts for my step-siblings. My cherished memories had been converted into playthings for them. This all happened as I was preparing to leave for college, a time when I would have naturally taken my belongings with me. It felt like a deliberate stripping away of my childhood, an act of profound insensitivity. However, fate had other plans. During my father's funeral, while sorting his effects with my uncle, we uncovered something astonishing: a will. My dad, who typically eschewed legal formalities, had indeed prepared one, stored secretly in a bank's safe deposit box. He had created it post-divorce to prevent any disputes, instructing my uncle on the proper timing for its disclosure. The contents of the will were even more startling. Despite their divorce, my dad had never transferred ownership of the house to my mom and had instead left it solely to me. All this time, my mom believed she lived in a house she owned, unaware of the legal specifics. Originally, I had intended to handle the situation quietly, considering she was still my mom. I thought maybe we could negotiate some agreement. But after her recent actions, I felt differently. All bets were off. I was fortunate to have my uncle's support during a complex time, as he handled all the legal matters for me. Over the next few days, I organized my affairs and had extensive discussions with Uncle about the legal aspects. I also reached out to mortgage loan officer and started browsing apartment listings, not for myself, but for my mom and her household. Once everything was in place, I returned to what I considered my home, fully prepared for a tough confrontation. Upon my arrival, my mom was visibly taken aback, especially with my uncle by my side. She likely thought I would plead with her to allow me to stay, but that was far from my plans. Her first instinct was to become emotional, trying to portray herself as a concerned mother, questioning why I had brought a lawyer. At the same time, my stepdad sat back with a confident smirk, assuming I had no legal grounds to stand on. I asked my mom to sit down so we could discuss something crucial. I sensed that no apologies were forthcoming in that room. I started calmly, inquiring if she remembered the specifics of her divorce from my dad. Her confusion was evident, likely puzzled by the direction of our conversation. Then, I revealed the key issue. My uncle presented the property documents we had discovered. As my mom and stepdad reviewed the documents, their expressions changed drastically. My uncle clarified that to avoid legal complications during their divorce, my dad had moved out but never legally transferred the property title. Legally, the house was still in his name, and as his sole heir, it now belonged to me. The atmosphere grew tense as the implications sank in. Suddenly, my mom became defensive, insisting it was unfair since she had been his wife and believed she deserved part of the property. She tried to claim her rights to the house, citing the years she spent living there and making it her home. David, my stepdad, now less arrogant but visibly worried, argued that they had no alternative housing and claimed it was unjust for me to claim the house. However, my uncle, always the voice of reason, attempted to defuse the situation. He pointed out that legally, as my dad's only child, I was the rightful property owner. He stressed that this was not about evicting them, but about acknowledging my legal rights, which had been neglected as they hurried to rearrange and sell my belongings. He proposed finding a fair solution, perhaps involving compensation for the sold items. My mom, however, rejected these suggestions. She accused me of being heartless and ungrateful, trying to punish her for moving on in her life. She claimed she had made many sacrifices for me, and now, when she needed support, I was abandoning her. Her words were manipulative, aimed at guilting me and denying me my rightful inheritance. When her emotional tactics failed, she threatened to take the matter to court to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. Throughout the entire ordeal, I found myself seated, quietly observing the unfolding drama. It felt as though all the years of suppressed frustration and countless moments where I had to bite my tongue to maintain peace were finally culminating. When I spoke up, I was clear and concise, letting her know that proceeding with her plans would only waste both our time and her money, and the inevitable outcome was already known to all of us. Despite this tension, I made my stance clear. I was not going to act unreasonably. I communicated my willingness to allow them ample time to secure a new residence, but I also firmly asserted that the house was now legally mine and their departure was inevitable. This declaration came in the wake of recent events that occurred during my absence, making it necessary for my mother to move on. However, the drama escalated just when I thought we had reached the apex of chaos. My stepdad intensified the situation dramatically by storming out of the room, only to return about 20 minutes later with my step-siblings, William and Sophia, in tow. The children appeared bewildered and slightly frightened, clearly unsure of why they had been thrust into this mess. My stepdad used their presence to challenge my actions, suggesting I was evicting innocent children and questioning whether I truly wished to be so cruel. His tone, laden with mock concern, seemed designed to cast me in the role of the villain. In that moment, his words struck a chord, and I hesitated, questioning whether proceeding with the eviction would make me no better than the others who had disregarded the children's feelings. It was then that my uncle interjected, advising me not to fall prey to their manipulative tactics. He suggested striving for a fair compromise that would serve everyone's interests. After much discussion, we reached a resolution that no one would be evicted immediately. Upon hearing this, my mother and stepdad's demeanor shifted from defensive to somewhat relieved, perhaps thinking they had manipulated the situation in their favor. However, I clarified that their continued residence in the house was contingent upon them paying rent at a fair market rate, determined by an independent assessor and formalized through a rental agreement. The atmosphere changed drastically with this declaration. What was once relief turned to indignation. My mother's expression transformed from grateful to furious almost instantly, and my stepdad seemed on the verge of exploding with anger. My mother vocally refused to pay rent in what she claimed was her own home, but I calmly reiterated that it was no longer her home, especially after her attempts to dispose of my belongings and evict me. I emphasized that paying rent was a reasonable expectation under the circumstances. My uncle supported this arrangement, pointing out its fairness and the stability it would provide for my step-siblings. The children, possibly understanding and relieved by the avoidance of immediate upheaval, nodded in agreement. This decision, while initially contentious, seemed to be a balanced solution that acknowledged the needs and rights of all parties involved. The entire situation started out simple enough. My mom, siblings, and I didn't have to change schools or say goodbye to any friends. However, things escalated when my stepdad took an unexpected, aggressive turn. Before anyone could even react, he lunged at my uncle, accusing him of instigating trouble and hurling insults at him. The scene quickly descended into chaos. I jumped in to help my uncle up while my mom tried desperately to restrain my stepdad, who was in a full-blown rage. My step-siblings recoiled in shock, distancing themselves from their father's fury. As the tension peaked, my uncle, maintaining his composure, took out his phone and dialed 911. He calmly warned my stepdad, David, to consider his next actions carefully, reminding him that assault charges were serious, especially with witnesses present. Despite seeming ready to attack again, my stepdad was stopped by my mom, who, by now, seemed to realize the severity of his outburst. When the police arrived, they gathered everyone's statements. David attempted to downplay the incident as a misunderstanding, but the officers didn't fall for it. Although my uncle chose not to press charges, the police sternly warned David to spend the night elsewhere to cool down. As he left, he ominously told me this wasn't the end of it. After everything settled down, I laid down the rules firmly. The kids and my mom could stay, but David was no longer welcome. Starting next month, rent would be due, no exceptions. My mom tried to object, but a glance at my uncle silenced her. I later pulled my siblings aside, apologizing for the turmoil and reassuring them that they would always have a safe place with me, no matter the adult conflicts. Now, with the house under my control and David gone, my mom has resorted to giving me the silent treatment, actually a preferable alternative to her previous outbursts. My step-siblings are treading carefully, likely unsure of their footing in this new family dynamic. Despite the legal clarity of my actions, I find myself grappling with the moral implications. Was I too harsh in imposing rent on my mom and kicking out David, or was I merely standing up for my rights and safety? So, here's my ask to the Reddit community. Considering the events and my decisions, did I overstep, or was I justified in my actions? I appreciate any advice or thoughts you can share as I navigate this complicated situation. We've been going through some truly intense family drama lately, the kind that feels like it's straight out of a soap opera. After all the sacrifices I've made, including the 9 long months of carrying you, it's been nothing short of exhausting. Fortunately, my stepdad has been out of the picture since the police intervened, which, frankly, has been a relief. On a brighter note, I recently had a deep and meaningful conversation with my uncle. I am immensely thankful for his unwavering support throughout this ordeal. Despite being injured during one of my stepdad's outbursts, he simply shrugged it off, emphasizing that supporting family is what really matters. His ability to forgive and continue supporting me without holding any resentment truly deepened my appreciation for him, making me feel all the more loved and supported. He, like everyone else, advised me to keep my distance from my stepdad for my own safety. We've meticulously documented every interaction since the initial confrontation, just in case things escalate. In addition, we consulted a mortgage loan officer to accurately assess our property's value and set a reasonable rental price. This was an eye-opening introduction to real estate that I hadn't anticipated needing, enriching my understanding significantly. However, my mom disagreed with the rental assessment, believing the house to be worth less. Thankfully, the agent clarified that our price was actually below the typical market rate for our area, considering the property's size and location. We've also initiated formal eviction proceedings against my stepdad due to his violent behavior. Despite my mom's emotional protests and attempts to minimize his actions, I stood firm, emphasizing that his behavior was utterly unacceptable and that I could not feel safe with him around. It was tough to witness her distress, but I had to remain firm for everyone's well-being. On a positive note, my step-siblings have been spending more time with me, which has been a pleasant change. The most touching moment was when William and Sophia managed to save an old watch that my dad had given me, along with a few other cherished items that my mom considered selling. They seem as bewildered and troubled by the current family dynamics as I am, but we've found solace in each other's company. I've made it a point to be transparent with them about everything happening, treating them as the young adults they are. We've shared many long discussions about their feelings, their concerns about the future, and even their feelings of guilt over their stepmom's actions with my belongings. Through it all, I'm doing my best to shield them from their dad's unpredictable behavior. We're navigating this tumultuous period together, finding comfort in our shared experiences and open conversations. I've made it clear to them that if he tries to contact them or shows up at the house, they need to immediately inform me or Mom. I'm diligently organizing everything before I head off to college, which is quite the task. It's been an intense few days, but I'm beginning to feel like I'm gaining control over the situation. There's still much to tackle, navigating legal complexities, potentially starting family therapy, and mending trust. But for the first time since Dad passed away, I feel like I'm taking charge of my life. I appreciate all the support I've received from everyone here on Reddit. It truly means a lot. I am meticulously documenting everything, including the unfortunate sale of my belongings by my mom. I've also changed the locks at our home, providing keys only to myself, my mom, and my step-siblings. Additionally, I'm considering installing security cameras as a precaution against any potential issues with David. Regarding legal actions against my mom for selling my stuff, I'm exploring options with the help of my uncle. However, my main priority is stabilizing our living situation and ensuring our home remains a safe haven for everyone. It's a tough period, but I'm committed to managing it step by step. Your questions have prompted me to reflect on the past, revealing several warning signs I had overlooked. For context, after my parents divorced, it was decided that I would live with my mom while my dad would visit periodically. This arrangement was fairly smooth until David, my stepdad, entered our lives. Problems began to surface soon after he married my mom. The house, once a place of comfort, started to feel less like home. David, often under the pretense of casual conversation, would suggest I consider moving out. His hints were frequent and unsettling, especially since I was only 16. David also often inquired about my financial preparedness, hinting that I should plan to leave. These interactions, initially dismissed as awkward social behavior, now appear to be subtle efforts to alienate me. Moreover, there were numerous instances where my mom and David asked me to lend my belongings to David's daughter, Sophia, initially. This too felt increasingly uncomfortable over time. I wasn't too bothered initially when Sophia, who often borrowed things from me and returned them in perfect condition, made requests. The situation took a serious turn, though, when my mom asked me to permanently give my new laptop, which I bought for school, to William, David's son. I gently refused, explaining that my laptop was essential for my studies as it contained all my school materials. David's reaction was excessive and unreasonable. He treated my refusal as a betrayal, advising William and Sophia to steer clear of me, painting me as the antagonist. This incident was a stark realization of how my needs and possessions were undervalued in our blended family dynamic. Despite these glaring issues, I stayed, partly because moving out would hinder my financial plans for college. Yet, part of me held on to a faint hope that the situation would get better, that my mom would recognize her neglect of me and start treating me better. A naive hope, as I later acknowledged. I discussed these feelings with my therapist, working through years of overt and covert neglect. The process has been tough, but I'm learning to accept how my mother favored her new family over me. Strangely, I'm somewhat thankful for these extreme challenges because they force me to stop excusing their dismissive behavior and confront the harsh realities of my family situation. This painful experience prompted me to take back control of my life. I'm grateful to everyone who offered advice and support during this difficult time. Recently, there's been a significant development. David's ex-wife, William and Sophia's mother, contacted me. In our small town, word spreads quickly, and she learned about the recent events. We met for coffee, where she revealed that David had been underpaying child support for years. He justified his actions by claiming his contributions to our household expenses were adequate, meanwhile neglecting his financial responsibilities to his children. She suspects that David's preference for having the kids live with us was a tactic to avoid paying child support, arguing that his direct support negated the need for payments. This revelation added another layer of complexity to the already intricate family dynamics, highlighting that David's motives for controlling the living situation extended beyond mere convenience or family unity. David had long been making financial decisions that benefited himself at the expense of his children's well-being and his own legal duties. It had been several years since the children's mother last saw her kids because David kept moving them from place to place. She approached me to see if I would be willing to testify about their living conditions and David's lack of involvement and financial support in a potential court case. Understanding the importance of this information, I agreed to testify to help set the record straight and ensure that William and Sophia received the support they deserved. This situation also revealed that my stepdad was not only at risk of being evicted due to a dispute over the house's ownership, but might also face legal issues for not paying child support as required by court orders. Failure to comply could lead to serious repercussions, including fines and possibly jail time, which might explain why David had suddenly vanished. His ex-wife expressed a strong desire to reunite with her children, and I assured her we would arrange a meeting soon, believing Sophia and William would be thrilled to see her after such a long time. I discussed all these developments with my mom. Initially, she couldn't believe her husband would do such things, but as the reality sank in, she was as shocked as I was. Although I have yet to fully forgive her for everything that happened, I couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for her as she, too, was a victim of David's betrayal. It's hard for me to fully sympathize with her, given everything, but it's clear that David is the primary wrongdoer here. While my mom isn't entirely blameless, she's also facing the consequences of her actions.